This is episode 264 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am pleased to be joined this week by Dave Heil. Dave is a county commissioner in Sandoval County. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Dave.
Well, Paul, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Yeah, and lots to talk about. Of course, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays
Yes,
as we head into the new year,
a much better one, I hope.
We all do, absolutely. And, we've got some specific issues with the upcoming legislative session because as soon as that calendar changes here in New Mexico, we start looking ahead to legislative sessions. We got a 60-day session, unlike any other. Dave, normally I haven't seen you personally up in Santa Fe at the Roundhouse much. Obviously, the county has people that they use for those kinds of things. But
Right.
have you, in the past, gone up there at all?
Oh, yeah.
Many times?
I've over the years, and not just as a county commissioner, but over the years, I've been up there on several different issues. Don't ask me what all the issues were. I just remember being there.
Yeah. Well, this will be a different session. Who knows exactly how it will all be carried out, but an emphasis on social distancing and Zoom meetings is likely in the offing.
Yeah, we've met with several. We have a process in which we like to meet with each one of the legislators that represent Sandoval County, and we've met with a couple of them so far, and very much looks like it's going to be a virtual process. So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
that's something we're not thrilled about, and hope there will be some legal challenges too, but we're not in the position to talk about any of that at this very moment. We want to talk about, first and foremost, Sandoval County. You look at the areas here in New Mexico that tend to dominate, call the political shots. In Santa Fe, statewide, big population areas. You think Albuquerque, you think Santa Fe, and you think Las Cruces. And not too far into the past, those were pretty moderate areas. Not Santa Fe. Santa Fe has always been Santa Fe. But
Right.
Albuquerque and Las Cruces were kind of political battlegrounds. Now, Rio Rancho, parts of your county are growing quickly,
Yes.
and they're more conservative.
Yeah, they certainly tend to be more conservative.
And, but that hasn't changed the dynamic. The dynamic is that the state is moving pretty far to the left. So let's just talk about your county. I know it's got a unique history, especially with regard to Rio Rancho. So talk about, what the differences are, why your county is a little bit different from the rest of New Mexico, at least these major urban areas in the Rio Grande Corridor.
Well, number one, it's the fastest growing county in the state. About 7% growth compared to, I think the next closest is Eddy or Lee County.
That's population growth?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And a lot of that is because people are moving into Rio Rancho, which, out of approximately 150,000 people, 100,000 of them we expect through this next census will be Rio Rancho. And a lot of people move to Rio Rancho because it's got one of the best school systems in the state. Business friendly environment. We have our Buy Rio Rancho program to encourage people to spend their money at local businesses. In fact, the mayor has come up with the Rio Rancho dining bingo. You can play bingo there and turn your bingo sheet in once a week and get prizes so anything to try and encourage.
Sure.
Our local business.
Now, I take it that's takeout bingo at this point because we're still in the red.
Yes.
Unless, and this is something I'm going to broach because, we're in that boat of people and organizations who are extraordinarily frustrated with our governor.
Yeah.
Now, you've seen some restaurants in other places, mostly down in the southeast, doing civil disobedience and pushing back against the governor and her
Mm-hmm.
diktats. Is that something, has that been contemplated by folks at the county, the city, in general? Is that something that there's been an interest in, a willingness to do?
Well, there's certainly a lot of interest from some people in the community that think that the county has some authority to be able to do that within itself, whereas a county, even a county that's a home rule county,
Mm-hmm.
is
Which you
got
are
its
not.
authority,
You are not
which
technically.
we are not,
Yeah.
gets its authority from the state. So it's not like we can override the state. We did pass a resolution. The county did a few months ago, encouraging the governor to open small businesses at the same standard as they were using for big box stores, where small businesses can manage that process probably better than Walmart or Lowe's or whatever. They have a lower volume of traffic, and they can kind of manage the people in the store. So it's kind of crazy that we have been hurting small businesses, in favor of big box stores. So
Yeah, and I'm going to presume they have checked all of their legalities, but I've now taken my kids two separate occasions to a trampoline park based in Rio Rancho. To my knowledge, other trampoline parks have closed, but we are at the Gessing household always on the lookout for businesses that are by any means necessary, to quote Malcolm X, are staying open, and whether they've gotten a dispensation from the governor or they're just reading the rules in a very broad manner. God bless them, because my kids have had a great time. And as has been the case for 10 months now, no COVID cases in the Gessing household.
well, my wife she went to Jazzercise this morning. She goes 3 times a week to Jazzercise. So if you maintain social distancing, I can see how Elevate might assume that that's they can comply with that. And I wish them well in the process.
Exactly. Well, we're happy to head up the hill and spend our money in Rio Rancho / Sandoval County whenever we can. Now, before we leave that discussion, obviously Rio Rancho is an urban area. It's unique and it is growing fast, and many of the reasons you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the rest of Sandoval County, how does that process kind of work? Because Sandoval's a big county.
It certainly
Anytime
is.
you drive up to the Four Corners, drive up to Farmington, you're like,
Yeah.
holy cow, am I still in
Sandoval
County? Because you get up to Cuba and it's
You're
a whole
still,
different world
yes,
relative to Sandoval County.
yes.
Now, how does that relationship work internally with your county? Because Rio Rancho is a fairly, especially for an urban area in New Mexico, fairly conservative place. It, population-wise, seems to be dominant. So, talk about that whole intra-county relationship situation.
Well, as a county commissioner, we have to speak for the entire county, although as a member, representative of the citizens of District 4, I mean, I'm all Rio Rancho or Rio Rancho Estates, so that's my number one priority. But, I deal with issues as to how to support, road projects or other social projects throughout the rest of the county. I mean, we have to consider all those issues. And frequently the issues come up with, where's the real tax base? And of course, a big part of the tax base is Rio Rancho. It's like 68% of the taxes, property taxes, come from Rio Rancho. So, but we've got to respect and deal with issues. And East Mountain, I don't know, most people don't know that Sandoval County stretches over the mountain to the other side there.
You're talking Placitas, right? Or
No, Placitas is on this side of the mountain. I'm talking about, the name of the communities have just slipped my mind for a moment, but there's 3 communities
okay.
on the other side of the mountain. And, we have a fire station over there, and we have to work with other counties to be able to service them, but it's just other areas that we have to deal with. In terms of political decisions, etc., how I don't think that gets too much involved in our discussion. I mean, my opinion is once you've won the election, it's time to get down to business and deal with the county, regardless of political issues. Sometimes that there's going to be an item that we're going to talk about today that a resolution that passed and passed along party lines.
Okay.
So
good to know. Well,
so those things happen.
before we get to that, one of the things that we've worked on in the past with you, attempting to lead the way, and you did successfully, along with Jay Block, especially Commissioner
Right.
Block, was right to work at the county level. Now, you mentioned your county is not a home rule county. Your privileges, your abilities to govern come from the state, and we, felt like under that law at the time that you had the right, as did other counties, to pass right to work, but other forces were at play, and Governor Martinez left us with Democrats controlling everything, and it's only gotten worse since then. And
Right.
and that right to work was overturned. But talk about just in general that issue, but other ways you try to make your county a little bit better from a free market perspective within the unfortunate constraints of the legislature.
Well, a couple things that we've done is not increase taxes. I mean, the only tax that we had to increase was the tax, a gross receipts tax, to pay for the rebuilding of the detention center, which was left in a deplorable state. We couldn't, but other than that 1/16th actually, that's the only tax increase that we have approved
Since
since I've been in office, and that was 2017,
okay,
January 2017.
I know there were some tax hikes further back than that, but yeah,
Yes.
that strikes me. And of course, Albuquerque, combined with the county, Bernalillo County, has been on a tax increasing binge. At one time, your gross receipts tax, I think, in Rio Rancho was
Higher. At one time was higher than Albuquerque, but it is not. In fact, when we did that detention center gross receipts tax, we were sure that we were doing increments that would keep Rio Rancho and Sandoval County below Bernalillo County and below Albuquerque, to change the history. And so now the gross receipts tax is now less than Albuquerque and many other neighboring communities. So.
Yeah, and of course, property taxes. Then that's something the county has a much bigger say in. Last I checked, you all were on the order of 10 mills, and we could get into how that's all measured, but mills is the way property taxes are measured. I think Bernalillo County's on the verge of 45 ish mills, depending on area and whatever else is going on. You guys are closer to 35, am I?
Right. And in fact, that's another reason that attracts people to Rio Rancho is the tax rates. Although we do have a little, like if you're going to build something new, there's a little higher impact fees, but over a couple of years, that flattens out real quick to you're paying lower taxes. And
what's an impact fee? Just as a
an impact fee is like when you have new construction in an area. There's contributions on each property would be contributions to the public services like police and libraries and all those kind of things. There's fees when you do the initial construction.
Okay. Now, I know that one of the first big issues way back when I started at the Rio Grande Foundation was eminent domain and restrictions on eminent domain. And you do have unique issues in Rio Rancho in particular due to its development with regard to infrastructure. Is that something that you're just kind of working on as a long-term project to overcome some of those infrastructure challenges? Talk about that issue and how it affects your county.
The reason that we have an issue is because AMREP sold off, hundreds of thousands of properties to individuals.
MREP was a development company back 60s, 70s,
Well, let's see, probably back in the 50s.
50s even.
I bought 6 lots in Rio Rancho when I was 20 some years old, like 21 or 22. So I mean, it's a long
So
time.
was this in New York or where were you?
No, I lived in Cleveland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
So you have this situation that has diverse ownership, and it's not like just people in the neighborhood; it's people all over the world that own the property. So assembling that property to be able to do something with it is an issue. And back some years ago, there was the Heil decision
Yep.
that came out of Connecticut, where they were using, the government was, through a developer, was taking people's property to create this development. I understand, by the way, that that's never been developed.
Yes. I just as a quick personal note, I was still in the D.C. area at the time because that's where I worked for the National Taxpayers Union. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was the one of the outreach people for the Institute for Justice, which litigated on the side of Suzette Kelo. And so I was able to, through a bit of a minor miracle, attend that particular hearing in person at the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was decided, unfortunately, against Suzette Kelo on behalf of governments
Yes.
being able to do this development.
But then what happened in a reaction, about 40 states passed laws that says that you could not use that municipal redevelopment process to take people's property.
We worked on that in New Mexico at the Rio Grande Foundation. So we may not agree 100% on this one, but Dave's a good guy, I promise.
So there was a situation where at one time Rio Rancho could do that.
Right.
So there's, let's see, there's 2 communities, Cabazon and, can't think of the other one. But there were 2 that were actually developed under that program. So since then, there are, minimal options as to what you can do to assemble property. I mean, it's just beat out the effort of assembling property. I mean, we've got people like Mike Skolnick that goes out and finds all the property owners and acquires it. But to do that, you have to have somebody that has the money that wants to buy that.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, today, we have Los Diamantes, which is, they're preparing the housing sites for new homes that'll be coming out of the ground here in the next probably 3 or 4 months.
Okay.
And that's the way it was assembled, by just gutting it out to go, contact all the people, find the owners, assemble the land.
Right.
And that's what they did. And they'll be building something like 500 homes there. So, I mean, it wasn't
Give us
small.
the parameters of where this new development's going to be.
It's west of Unser. If anybody's been in that neighborhood, drive out west side. I would encourage it because there's a new elementary school out there, a beautiful elementary school. Hasn't been used much this year, but
Right.
the Joe Harris Elementary School, and then Los Diamantes is just beyond that. And then on the north side of west side is a business park. And when they built west side, they put all the stub ins all along the way. So all those lands on either side most of them are zoned commercial, have the access to utilities from west side, because everything that was put in was, sewer, water, electric, everything all the way out there.
And that's not far away from Rust Presbyterian.
No, it's right across the street.
Right.
In fact, it's right
And
there.
the park above, which is one of the ongoing
Yes.
problems in my household, that the city has not reopened park above.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a problem.
Because, I'll just blow everybody's cover right now. I don't know what the rules and restrictions are on playgrounds right now for real. At sometimes the city of Albuquerque has restricted them, but park above is a unique park, and it's really a great amenity.
Yes.
I mean, it cost a lot of money for
It did. A
the
lot
city.
of time and volunteer effort, too.
Right, but it's for essentially geared towards all uses for special needs kids. Obviously, it's a wonderful facility for kids of all sizes and abilities, but it's a really neat facility. And to my knowledge, it's been closed since COVID-19. began. And it's right out there off of West Side Drive, not far
Right.
from Rust as well. So, well, that's good. Certainly, if they can get those houses built in a quick fashion, because despite all the issues we're going to talk about in just a few minutes with public policy in our state, housing, real estate agents and housing developers say that it is the boom
It
times.
is absolutely. I mean, if you have a house under 250,000 in our community, it's sold within a week.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just crazy as to how quick they're turning. And I've been in the real estate business in the past, and when I look at this market, I says, "Geez, I never recall that kind of situation before."
Yeah.
How's
And,
that?
again, something we can't quite go down that rabbit hole, but
Yeah,
seemingly people in California and New York and some of these high tax, high cost of living states are realizing, I can work remotely from anywhere. And New Mexico is one of the states that they seem to be coming to, partially because of the lower costs relative to their home
well,
states.
and you look at Sandoval County too. Now we have two hospitals. There's a lot, plus easy access to Loveless. I mean, it's a great place for being sure that you have health care. You know,
Yeah.
just a great environment, positive business, best schools.
And I talked to somebody who I can't name, but he said recently, and I'm talking within the last few months, the number of permits issued in Sandoval County was higher than Bernalillo County for the first time in
Yes,
history.
right.
So that is an indicator of the center of gravity and how it's shifting
Hmm.
in this metro area, and I suspect it's going to only continue to shift.
I think it is. We
Yeah. Is there, before we move on, is there a philosophical difference on crime and punishment issues? You mentioned the corrections facility out there. And I mentioned before we came on the air that we had a break-in at the Rio Grande Foundation offices in downtown Albuquerque. It's no secret to anybody that crime is a real issue, not just in our state, but especially in the city of Albuquerque and Bernalillo County. A lot of those issues, you just drive up the hill and it seems like they go away. Now, I'm not saying that that is a reality, so talk
well,
a little bit about that.
I think one of the big things is the relationship that we have with our police force, Rio Rancho, and then also the relationship that our deputies with the sheriff's department and the community. Um, I can remember when we lost an officer, and to crime, and in his passing, we gathered almost 2,000 people at Haynes Park
Mm-hmm.
the next night,
Wow.
to hold a recognition of him. And it's just people have a good relationship with the police force. I mean, we're working together. I think that's a big difference. And I think Albuquerque has some serious problems being, partly an older community, also being the hub of I-25 and I-40. And I'm sure I'm not expecting there's no drug traffic in Sandoval County, because I know there is, but it's probably much greater in the Albuquerque area, and they have a much bigger challenge than we do. But, I think we have a great police force. I think we have a great sheriff's department. I think the people work well with both of them.
All right. Well, let's talk about the political challenges facing not just us as a state, but of course, let's start with the upcoming legislative session, and we can just kind of freewheel it in terms of what you would like to see done in Santa Fe. But there has been talk of legislation known as the Civil Rights Act that is
Yes.
going to be pushed in this session. And the reason that I kind of wanted to have you come on the show is to talk about your county's opposition to that particular legislation and what it would do, why you're opposed to it, and just lay it on us. What's going on here?
Well, first of all, I want to say that Sandoval County was late to the game in terms of a resolution. We have fellow counties: Rio Reba, Valencia, Curry, Socorro. I'm sure I don't have them all, but there's also the city of Albuquerque, the city of Angel Fire, the city of Santa Fe, the New Mexico counties, New Mexico Municipal League, the Middle Rio Grande Council of Governments is all opposed to what this concept is. And basically, the Civil Rights Commission was chartered under, I think it was House Bill 5, was chartered to go create how we can have more lawsuits, and how we can deal with qualified immunity, and whether you could charge, whether the plaintiff would get the attorney fees covered. I mean, that was the intent of this Civil Rights Commission. Mm-hmm. It wasn't go find a solution to civil rights. It was how to create more lawsuits.
Okay, before we let you go on further, talk about qualified immunity.
Oh boy, I'm not an attorney.
Okay, well,
so
I'm happy to give you the textbook definition or whatever as I know it, but that seems to be one of the core features of that issue, and there's a lot of my libertarian friends who are completely anti-qualified immunity. There's talk of reforming it here in New Mexico and around the country, but just give us your understanding of what it really means.
Well, first of all, I want to say that in New Mexico courts, qualified immunity doesn't apply, according to a discussion with one of the representatives that we've already talked to that is an attorney. He doesn't happen to deal with civil rights cases, but, So qualified immunity applies in federal court, but it doesn't apply in state court. I think the real issue here is the fact that the way this is currently written, any public employee, this isn't just restricted to law enforcement. This could be school teachers. This could be county manager. This could, it doesn't limit it to just law enforcement. So, as I understand it, with regard to the qualified immunity, because of the way the system is set up now, we don't have a good process for disciplining bad actors. And the qualified immunity isn't really a impediment to the bad actors, because by the time you review the bad actor situation, they've still been performing their duties as say a law enforcement, because it takes so long to get a hearing under the law enforcement division, I think is the name of it. And by the time you get around to disciplining the officer, that officer may have moved on to two other government jurisdictions.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say that even though this wasn't in their charter, they did come back and recommend that I want to be sure I have the name of that right, is the Law Enforcement Association, I guess. They've made some recommendations as how to improve that situation. Mm-hmm. That they take it out from under the state police or the state Justice Department, Department of Public Safety, and by doing that, it would have its own independence and would be able to enforce discipline and training, et cetera, to resolve the situation.
Now, this Civil Rights Act, now qualified immunity is one aspect of that, mm-hmm. and that has local governments concerned about financial impacts and
well, the way
lawsuits.
the way it's currently written, there's no no caps,
Mm-hmm.
and could be, again, against any public employee. And the concern is there's also no insurance. And the likelihood of getting any insurance, I mean, New Mexico counties, for instance, is one of our one of the things that they do is they provide insurance coverage for counties, and they're able to reinsure. Well, they don't believe in talking with their insurance people that they would be able to do that. The other thing from a county is we have detention centers, so those would be included in this process. Well, right now, Sandoval County, we're in the process of getting our detention center accredited, but while it is not accredited, we're insured through New Mexico counties up to $2 million. And then there's a donut hole from $2 million to $6 million. So if we lost a lawsuit on that and went to, say it was a $4 million lawsuit, $2 million would come right out of the budget. That means $2 million that doesn't pay for training of sheriff officers, providing services to seniors in the community, maintaining roads, etc. That's the big concern that we have here, is they're proposing something that has kind of an unlimited liability exposure for government entities, public government entities, and the probability of that in even one lawsuit that you could end up with no choice but increasing taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, increasing taxes is not a good foundation for, we kind of talk out of two sides of our mouth. Here at the state level, we say, well, we want to diversify our economy. Well, you can't expect you're going to diversify economy if you're going to keep increasing taxes or the risk of tax increases. What business would want to move into New Mexico with that risk?
Now, you mentioned insurance, and that seems to be a big sticking point here. But specifically relating to police officers, because when I think of or hear the term qualified immunity, that's the group of people that this whole situation kind of came about.
Correct.
George Floyd, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the particulars of police reform, activists has been addressing qualified immunity and making sure that police officers can't abuse that in their line of work in order to get off from doing bad acts of some kind. Now, so maybe I guess what I'm asking is, if you were presented with something that was addressing qualified immunity, limiting qualified immunity, whatever, when it came to just law enforcement officers, would that be a better situation than all government employees, or is that still something that's unacceptable?
No, I think a better solution is let's find a way to stop civil rights abuses in the first place.
Yeah, that's definitely the best solution. Yeah.
I did a little bit of research, and North Carolina had they sort of in sync with New Mexico. The governor there founded their racial equity and criminal justice task force.
Mm-hmm.
They did a very in-depth study. They had this main task force with subgroups that were focused on law enforcement and the criminal courts process, etc. They came with 123 suggestions as to how to eliminate civil rights abuses, none of which included creating more lawsuits. Okay, and I think that's the approach that we need to be taking, rather than figure out how we can create more lawsuits. And interestingly enough, when you read the minority opinion with regard to the report on the civil rights, they talk about, better training for police officers, helping them understand, difficult situations like substance abuse and behavioral health issues, and also spending some funds on behavioral health issues. For instance, I want to just toot Sandoval County's horn here with the mill levy for Sandoval Regional Medical Center, we insisted on some of those funds go into substance abuse and behavioral health issues at our detention center. Because many of the people that we have in that detention center are there because of substance abuse and behavioral health issues. So when we have them leave the detention center, we'd like them not to come back because of those issues. And so now we have this relationship where Sandoval Regional Medical Center and the UNM Health Services to provide that service to, and those are the kind of issues that are going to solve civil rights abuse, not more lawsuits.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to leave that discussion. Keeping in the legislative terrain, though, you mentioned substance abuse, and I'll just throw it out there because you know that marijuana legalization is probably going to happen this session. And in a lot of states where they have done legalization, there are provisions for county governments in particular to opt out and take a different track on that. Not that Sandoval County would necessarily do that, or that's even been thought about. But do you think marijuana legalization is going to cause problems for additional issues with law enforcement, behavioral health, those kinds of things in our state, or is that something you're not particularly worried about at this time?
Well, I happen to agree with you that I think it's something that's going to pass because it's being passed in other states across the country. It's interesting that PFM report talked about legalization of marijuana so we could create another tax base for diversifying our economy.
Right.
I think it's a trade-off. I mean, you may be getting more revenue for taxes on marijuana, but you're going to be spending the money in social services in your community to help people. I have known in my lifetime a lot of people that are smoke marijuana, conduct themselves on a regular business basis. They're not, they don't go off to other drugs, etc. But there are those people that are they're just addicted to things. They'd be addicted to gambling. They'd be addicted to alcohol. They'd be addicted to drugs, whatever. That are going to need help. And so some of those tax dollars that you think you're going to have this great new revenue source is going to have to be spent to deal with social services, because of marijuana use. And by the way, it's already being used.
Right. Absolutely.
It's not like,
And I while generally sympathetic at the Rio Grande Foundation, we are to the legalization issue. Definitely the dollar signs in the eyes of state policymakers is very concerning. And, people don't remember that when Colorado passed this initially, which of course they were the first out of the chute to do it, they both gave local governments an out so that they didn't have to do it if they didn't want to. And they also dedicated nearly all of the substantial revenues to education and behavioral treatment and those kinds of issues.
You said, you made the comment, don't remember, and I suspect maybe the reason they don't remember is maybe they were by yeah. Yes, you're right. They don't remember that, and they should look hard at Colorado as to how much they've had to spend in additional social services, those kind of things as a result of it.
Now, we have just a few minutes remaining, but obviously, Sandoval County marches to the beat of a different drummer when it comes to economic policies in New Mexico. We've already talked about right to work and the fact that your county would like to see that done in Santa Fe, which has about as much chance as them repealing all taxes in this session. So what kind of things would you like to see realistically, whether it's this legislature or, in a future session, some issues that you think really need to be talked about to get this state on and county on a firmer footing economically?
Well, to be competitive, well, first of all, New Mexico needs to think that they need to be competitive, and I don't think they do. Sometimes they act as though we're just this island, and we are sort of an island. Unfortunately, it's an island of poverty because we're not using the right, we're not putting the right policies in place. Gross receipts tax is for one. If we don't fix gross receipts tax, there's no way we're going to be competitive with neighboring states. And that's who we need to think about. In fact, there's a Curtis Decker report that came out of the Tax Foundation that studies bordering counties within states, and like the bordering counties between New Mexico and Arizona, or between New Mexico and Colorado. And it has done this across the nation. And it reflects how important tax policy is to the growth, the business growth within a community. Gross receipts tax, too, is such a deterrent to new entrepreneurs because it's a regressive tax when it comes to small businesses. Because when you, in fact, I noticed the business impact, and you had one comment in your email about the PFM report, and you had indicated that New Mexico was 7th. Well, in the reports I found, New Mexico was 5th in terms of the worst situation in terms of percentage of sales and excise taxes to personal income. And I'm not sure that that is even properly reflected, because when you look at gross receipts tax, it's not the 5.4% that's listed in that study. When you start looking at the pyramiding of taxes, in some cases it could be 15 or 20%. I don't know what that averages out across the overall state, because obviously it doesn't apply to everybody. But still, if we don't solve that gross receipts tax issue, complaints about too much. I noticed James Jimenez had an article in the paper this past Sunday about the taxes on richer folks and other taxes that should be adjusted, and that they haven't made any impact on more business. Well, until you solve the gross receipts tax issue, none of those are going to have much of an influence on bringing new business. And when you look at most of the business that we brought to the state, it's what we've kept in the state. If you look at Sandoval County, we've kept AmFab in New Mexico instead of them going somewhere else. And there's a new one that was just announced this past week. I think it's Intex Bio. I may have that incorrect, but they're coming to Rio Rancho. We kept them from going to another state. I mean, there were people who already had some emotional investment in New Mexico. So, but we're not drawing new businesses that because of that gross receipts tax. Now, people will point to Facebook. Well, Facebook doesn't have any significant gross receipts tax implication. I mean, they're a virtual entity, So
Plus, they got a lot of tax benefits
yes,
and reductions and
right.
all kinds of
But we've got to
things.
solve that. We got to make ourselves competitive from a tax standpoint. Yes, we can work on a workforce training and things of that sort. Yes, our neighboring states are right to work, but I don't know if that alone would make a difference. And if you don't solve the tax problem, and Representative Harper has invested a lot of time and effort in trying to do something on that and done a lot of studying on it. I don't know with this change of the legislature how receptive with the loss of John Arthur Smith, et cetera, and more conservative thinking.
Well, Jason's been on the podcast a number of times before talking about these issues. And my philosophy is, I would be glad if we could get any momentum among Democrats in leadership on this issue. But they didn't want to do it when we had billion-dollar surpluses, and you could have that kind of wiggle room
Yes.
to enact a sweeping tax reform. The idea that the more progressive leaning Democrats are going to do it now seems highly unlikely, but I would love to be proven wrong.
Well, I'd love to have you proven wrong too, but then I can be optimistic that at least think about how we're going to make a transition to that. I realize that you probably can't do it overnight because you're going to have to find some adjustment in taxes to balance that out. When you look at the other thing in that PFM report was a gas tax.
Right.
I mean,
Oh, they wanted to raise every tax
yes,
imaginable.
but the gas tax, who does that hurt?
Right.
It hurts poor people.
Right.
I don't care if I have to pay an extra 50 cents a gallon on taxes, but that 50 cents a gallon might be milk and bread and et cetera to a poor family. So.
Yep. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for your time today. If you
Heck, I was just getting wound up.
if you're interested in more on that PFM report that we wrote about here at the Rio Grande Foundation, you can find links to it as well as 2 different blog postings about it from errorsofenchantment.com, December 16th and December the 17th. We had blog postings in which we detailed, certainly not in agreement with all of what they say in that report, way too much emphasis on higher taxes, but also some good information. And then on the New Mexico Civil Rights Act, several media outlets, and I'm looking at one from the Associated Press, post on KOB's website, KOB TV, that is December the 6th, talks about the county's concerns on the issue of that Civil Rights Act and how it could cause some real problems. So thank you for your time, Commissioner Heil. And I guess you can be found at sandoval.gov. Is that?
Well, that's Sandoval County, nm.gov.
All right. Thank you for your time today and sharing a little bit about what's going on in your county and the city of Rio Rancho as well. Thanks for listening to this week's show. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.